cool. Something on the news. Yeah.
But we didn't say that. I was going to see if you want to ask.
I talked about that since day one.
Well,
you should know that.
I know, but I didn't know if you wanted to ask because I didn't ask if I don't think.
Okay. Do you guys remember day one we talked about epiphytes? Okay. What was the example of an epiphyte that we talked about?
Moss.
Yeah, or Spanish moss. Okay. What was the relationship between the moss and that tree?
No, it was parasitic.
No.
No, it didn't have. It wasn't one of the.
It's not. It's not mutualistic. It's not parasitic.
No, you said it.
Commensalistic.
No.
No, it wasn't one of the three.
It's not one of the three. There is no relationship. Okay. Air plants just live on that tree. There is no commensalistic, mutualistic, parasitic relationship there. They just live there. No one is really benefiting. No one is getting harmed. It's nothing. It's just that's where it lives. Okay. So please understand, epiphytes do not have any type of that relationship. Now, real quickly, this is a great. This is a really good diagram to look at because it talks about the flue. When you look at the the prairie here, all right, the water that's moving through it, that's what we call the slough. Where do you think this water is actually coming from? Where do you think this slow? It's very slow moving. You can't looking at it here. You're not thinking, oh my gosh, it's water's moving. Actually, how fast does it move?
It's about a mile per day.
Okay.
Well, a mile per, if you were to straddle
right.
the length.
About a mile per day. Okay, that's really, really slow. Okay, very, very, very slow moving water. Where do you think this water starts? Where is it coming from?
North.
Yeah, around Orlando. Okay?
Yeah.
That's where it's actually coming from, and it's moving very, very slowly. So think about it. Everything that happens up there is going to affect down here. Huge, huge problem. Everything that happens up there affects down here. That was a big problem years and years ago when they decided to build Disney. Okay? I'm a huge fan of Disney, but Disney, back in the day, was not very into conservation. That area was a huge wetland area that they just dug up and built Disney. And it caused lots and lots and lots of problems for the water that was actually trickling down into this area, and it basically caused the contributing factors of the Everglades drying up. All right. It caused a problem also with the Kissimmee River, with Lake Okeechobee, with flooding. I mean, all of that all trickles down into what we have here, right? And there's a lot of different problems when you're looking at the Everglades drying up. There's been invasive plants that have been introduced. Melaleuca is in here, right? Yeah, Melaleuca, Australian pine, all of these things are just sucking up the water. They were actually introduced to try to help a problem. Now they've created a problem, all right? So it's a big, big thing, but that's what you're looking at when you're looking at the zoo. It's just this very slow water moving all the way from the north all the way until you actually get into the Gulf.
What was the name of the plants you said they incorporated to try to prevent the problem?
Australian pine.
We have that around us.
Yeah, we have a ton of it around us.
Yeah, so the settlers, the people who were trying to build here to attract visitors and make this a viable place, knew that they needed to drain out some of the swamp. because it was just an uninhabitable wilderness. So they planted Australian pines, they planted the Melaleuca, Brazilian peppers. They spread the Melaleuca seeds by airplane.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Oh,
by air, just to be more effective at it. They did a great job.
They did.
And so they're. Oh, there's an in here that's got fish.
Oh, cool. You guys see it?
Yeah.
See how it's in the sphere?
Yeah,
Assuming it is. I don't
flapping
know.
around.
Okay.
How did you know?
Oh, God. All teachers have eyes behind their heads. I'll never forget that.
And mothers.
And mamas, yeah.
Exactly.
Double whammy here.
So there, when you were talking about that before, it sort of reminded me that there was something I left out when we were speaking when we first started. Kind of just went right into the ecosystem and the restoration and how important that is. But I didn't really talk much about what we have here. So we have nine distinct habitats that occur in the Everglades, and each of those habitats are dictated by water, whether it's fresh water or salt water, how much there is, how little there is, what time of the year it comes, quality of water, so water quality, quantity, distribution, and fire. So, and also how high that area is. So altitude, which is relative for us here in Florida, water, and fire. So those three things will dictate what type of a habitat or plant community you're going to have in each individual area. So you were mentioning before, Professor Fernandez, about the slough. If you think about topography in South Florida area in terms of mountains and valleys, the slough would be the valley. So that's where the water is gradually, it's naturally going to gravitate in that slough. And when you disrupt that flow, that's where you have problems down the line. So I wanted to make sure that I hinted on that. I apologize I didn't talk about that.
No, you're good. Can you talk about your major invasives, both animals and plants?
You touched upon the
Right.
classic plant invasives that we fight against. Here in this park, one of our major plant invasives is the Brazilian pepper. It's also called Florida holly. It's a biggie. We have a huge restoration project just down the road from here. That's called the Hole in the Donut Restoration Project. If you are interested,
The donut hole.
yeah, Hole in the Donut. You can look it up. There's tons of information on it on our website. But when this park was established, I mentioned it was 1947, not that long ago. There were still private landholders in this area. And so farming was a huge business in this area, as you can see on your drive in. And so farmers had land in the park and were grandfathered up to, I believe, maybe the late 70s, maybe early 80s. It's vultures up on the roof. Don't worry about them, just vultures on the roof.
Come on.
So when the leases for the farmers expired, the farmers abandoned their land here and they became overtaken with this Brazilian pepper because it likes disturbed areas. So we had these Brazilian pepper forests that were absolutely impenetrable. They were not good for the wildlife. They didn't let any native plants occur there, and it was a huge problem for us because here we are supposed to be protecting and preserving for future generations a wilderness, and we've got acres and acres and acres and acres of this invasive forest of Brazilian pepper. So we have the Hole in the Donut Restoration Project. So an aerial photo would show this beautiful landscape and then this hole in the middle. So that's how it got the name. So over the course of the years, lots of methods were tried to try to get rid of this because you guys may have learned that getting rid of invasive species is not easy. And so finally what was learned was that you could scrape all the way down to the limestone bedrock, so you don't have to spray or use any chemicals. You can't use fire because it just regenerates it. So they scrape all the way down to the bedrock, and they remove the material, pile it up. Then they use like a street sweeper type of thing to clean the limestone all the way, and then eventually the native plants will come and take over. I wish we had a chance to see that because you actually can see from the road the process. You can see the areas that have been restored. You can see the areas that have just been done, just been treated. The areas that are waiting to be treated. It's really, really cool to see. So that's a big one for us. There's another one that's called Old World Climbing Fern. That is pretty invasive. It's hard to manage. Our biologists try to manage that one with fire. So certain times of the year they will set fire from helicopters to some of the mangrove forests that are inundated with this old world fern. That's one way. It's also loss of native plants, which is a huge problem too. Invasive animals. Anybody want to throw some out there that you've heard of?
Maybe not so much Everglades, but the lionfish or something for the Keys.
That's a big one. And it isn't so much in the Everglades, but we do have saltwater habitats in the Everglades.
So that would python, anaconda.
That's probably like the sexiest invasive animal we have
Nice.
right now. It gets a lot of attention, the python.
Mm-hmm.
Fire ants are a big one too.
Mm-hmm.
They take out our native ants.
Like the carpenter ant.
We have gar. So invasive fish. What time is it?
Isn't tilapia an invasive? It was an introduced species.
It's introduced, and I'm not sure if it's considered to be invasive. It's
No.
definitely exotic.
It's exotic. It's not invasive.
But it's established.
Yeah.
It's here. And it's one of the challenges that we're facing. So I mentioned earlier in the day we're doing all this work to bring water down into the Everglades flowing south, but we have to also make sure that that water that's coming down isn't bringing invasive species from upstream. It's just another thing that our scientists have to be, and our engineers have to be concerned about. So yeah, we've got Cuban tree frogs. Those are an exotic that are a problem for us.
What about those lizards?
I was just going to mention
There was
those.
a green knoll, so does that mean there's the Cuban knolls?
The brown anoles are Cuban anoles, and your professor is definitely more knowledgeable on that subject than I am. I don't know if we consider the Cuban anoles to be invasive, but they're definitely established, and there's not a whole lot of native anoles left.
Yeah,
So
They are
brown
invasive.
anoles take outcompete and displace the Florida green anoles. And so up where we are, it's a very rare occasion that you see a green anole.
I've never seen one until today, so.
they're
Wow.
still to see.
And brown anoles can actually be green.
They can be a greenish color, probably not as green as we saw.
That
It's
one was
not as
neon
that was
green.
very, very green, but they're going to be a little bit more of a greenish, brownish color to them. So it is a little bit difficult to tell. Okay, is this a green or is this a brown?
The green anoles are like the color of your
Well,
shirt. They're
the
really
Cuban anoles look more.
That's what
They
color
are,
that
yeah,
one was.
right. And they definitely will take over.
And there's other native exotic small lizards too. There's one that's got like a real curly tail. I forget the name of it. But the big lizard that everyone's talking about
Iguana.
right now is the tegu.
No.
Oh, the what?
The iguana's one, but the tegu is the big one.
Tegu's a big one.
Tegu. Yeah, it's T-E-G-U. Tegu. And up until very recently, they hadn't been seen inside the boundaries of Everglades National Park, but they have been found within the
Oh,
Everglades
no.
National Park now. We've got students working on trapping them. We've got projects going on. They can be about this big. They kind of look like an iguana, but they're meaner looking. They're
More like a monitor.
And they're more
Yeah.
aggressive.
Yeah, they're very
They're
aggressive.
very aggressive.
And I understand that if they bite you, you'll have a very nasty infection.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's
They do.
some-
Their,
they gotta be related to
saliva
monitor.
has a lot of bacteria in it, a ton of bacteria, so it will cause a very nasty infection. I don't remember where they're native from.
I know monitor lizards all have that
Where
same
are they native
bacteria.
to?
I don't remember what the right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I want to
either.
say out in the
I mean, it's old world, but
Yeah, it is
I
old
thought it was
Philippine,
like
maybe?
Southeast.
yeah, I was thinking southeast too. I think the tegu's
But
more
don't
southeast.
quote me. We'll find out. We'll let you know.
Yeah. But it's
interesting.
definitely something that we're very concerned about here in the Everglades. And then, of course, the pythons that I think probably everybody's heard about. They're a huge problem. They get so much larger than any of our native snakes, and we don't know how many there are, and they're really hard to find. And because they're so large, they have huge clutches that they, release.
Yeah.
An adult female python can have like 200 eggs inside her. So, I mean, it's a huge issue.
What do you do with them when you catch them? That's what I figured.
Well, most of the time. Sometimes they're
That's what we're
used
talking
for
about.
radio telemetry, but most of the time they are dispatched humanely.
It's a necessary
Have to
evil.
receive training to handle one if you come across one?
Absolutely.
Have you had to use it yet?
I am happy to tell you I do not have python training. So, if I were to see a python, which has happened to me twice on this trail, I would call dispatch, who would call a trained ranger to come out and try to capture that python.
And they would dispatch it.
And they would take it to the research, and then they would decide what's going to happen. But we have a lot of people. We've got park staff. We have park partners. There are research groups who are trained specifically on handling these pythons. We can't just give carte blanche to our visitors to say, hey, if you see a python, go ahead and wrangle it and then just bring it to the visitor center and we'll take care of it. Like, it just doesn't work.
Didn't they do that recently in the Everglades? They had a python hunt,
The
basically?
hunt? That's interesting. So there was this python hunt for, I think it was the whole state of Florida. And they called it the Everglades Python Hunt. And it occurred everywhere except within Everglades National Park.
Nice.
Because we don't allow hunting inside the park. So there is capture of animal, but it's very highly monitored. It's, training is required. Lots and lots of requirements for handling any kind of animal in the park, whether it's trapping the tegus or
Alligators,
whatever.
yeah.
So I think statewide during that hunt, which was about 4 months long, they killed 32 pythons or something like that. Very low number.
Well, I think since people were untrained, they were maybe 32 pythons and 15 other snakes basically.
And that's
They didn't know what they were doing.
exactly. And I think that it brought a lot of publicity to the issue, which was a good thing. And I think there have been a lot of critics of the park or just management in general saying, well, if you guys know this is a problem, why aren't you just getting people out there to take care of it? Well, it's not that easy. And I think that hunt kind of made that obvious to people who thought maybe it's just that easy, but it's not. It's a really, really big.
Now, a few years ago, when we were down here, someone stated that only 10% of the small mammal population is left because of them. Is that still the case?
There was a huge study that's come out about that study. I think that's still the case. And the first conclusion that people were coming to was, oh, it's the pythons. So there was another study that came out to try to counter that study. And what they wanted to do was find out what's happening to these small mammals. So they got some marsh rabbits. And I don't know how many there were, but there were marsh rabbits that were tagged and that were released here, right by the park headquarters. Some in the Big Cypress National Preserve, and then in some other sites around. And so they would release these rabbits and then track them to find out what was happening to them.
The baby's hat. In the water.
Did it go in the water?
I'll get it!
Yeah, the water.
Huh? Sorry about that, guys.
The baby's hat.
Her hat, I didn't see it. Oh,
Oh,
This baby's gotta go get it.
no, it's
sorry,
good.
guys. Yeah.
Listen.
So anyway, that study was interesting because they would find, I think there was an expectation that all of these rabbits were going to end up inside the bellies of snakes, and that wasn't the case. Some of them just died. Some of them were taken by birds. Some of them did get eaten by snakes, and then some of them they didn't find. Some of them did make babies. So I haven't